Hey there, welcome to part 6 of building a WhatsApp web clone with Appwrite. In the previous video, we finally created our first group using the Appwrite backend. Something that's really important that happened between the last video and now is that Appwrite just released their version 1 release, which is really exciting because it means that there's finally a production ready release, and it makes everyone more comfortable using it. It'll also be fully backward compatible, which is really exciting. We can see here that we have the Appwrite 1 announcement, our #1 product of the day, which is really cool. So the first thing we're gonna need to do is just migrate from our previous version of 15 or 0.15 to Appwrite 1. So in order to do that, all you really need to do is go to the parent directory of your Appwrite folder. So if we look over here, I installed Appwrite in my root directory. So we have cd Appwrite. What you're going to want to do is run this command one level up. So the parent directory Appwrite and the docker compose, you want to run this command, the docker run it, whatever it is, in the parent directory. Once that's finally done, you're going to want to cd into the Appwrite folder and run the migration command. And then you'll be ready to go. So let's jump right into it. So if we remember where we were holding, if I go open up the code, so we'll see that in our group store, we'll see that when we created our new group, we actually didn't invite the members to the new group. So we're going to do that now. So in order to do that, there are two ways really to go about it. We can either use the client side API. So that would be, if we look at the create group, so we see there's a function called team.invite, or add membership rather, team.create membership, right, where we can create the membership. The reason why we're not going to do it this approach is because it requires setting up email sending, which is out of scope for this tutorial. So we're going to have to use the server side API. And this is actually a good thing because it'll allow me to introduce a new piece of functionality from Appwrite that we haven't yet discussed, which are Appwrite functions. So if we go to the Appwrite console for a second, you can see that we have, let me just delete these functions since I was playing around with them a little bit. Settings and delete. So what are functions? Functions are little pieces of code that you can run in the backend in case Appwrite's functionality isn't enough for you. So we're going to actually create a function that will allow us to invite members to our to our new team. So let's see actually how that will look. So we go to the terminal, and the first thing that you're going to need to do is install the Appwrite CLI. So before we actually do that, you're going to want to go to, just do a Google search for Appwrite CLI, and you can install it with npm or brew, or whatever way you want to install it. So for Windows, using PowerShell. I prefer to do it with npm. It's just the easiest if you have Node set up already. It's the simplest way to get started. And then make sure that you have it installed by typing appwrite-v, and you should see 1 point something. This may take a little bit of time. For some reason, Appwrite CLI is a little bit slow for this specific command. So if we wait a minute, we'll see that worked. There we go. So we have Appwrite 1.1.1. So what we're going to actually do is Appwrite init, and we'll see what flags we have available. Project. So the first thing we do is Appwrite init project. And we want to link this directory to an existing Appwrite project and WhatsApp. And now it's successfully linked. You can see that we actually created an appwrite.json file, which just sets up the correct project ID and the project name. The next thing we need to do is Appwrite login to allow the Appwrite instance to log in to, the Appwrite CLI to log into our Appwrite instance. So I think it was jacob@test.com, and the password, so that wasn't correct. In a second, I'll just copy it over in case I don't remember it. Okay, so I'll just have to copy it over. So I'll go to my Appwrite instance and just copy the password here. And let's log in again. Just make sure that the email is correct, jacob@test.com. That's correct, jacob@test.com, and the password. And we see a login success. All right. Once you've logged in successfully, We're now going to do Appwrite init function. And we'd like to name our function add members. What ID? So we're going to have a unique ID. We want it in Node.js. And just like that, it created our function. And this is really cool. If you look in the functions directory, you'll see we now have an add members function, but it won't yet show up in the console. Oh, actually it will, but it won't have a deployed build yet. See, no deployments found. So what we're going to want to do is first take a look at what this actually created for us. If we go into the index.js of add members, we'll say we create a new client. We have all the Appwrite SDK APIs. We're only going to need teams, so let's delete everything else except for that. And now we see here two things that we need. We need the Appwrite function endpoint in the variables of the function. We also need the Appwrite function API key. So let's do these two things right now. So in terms of the API key, let's just delete this. This is the previous one. So you want to add an API key, and you want to add teams read, teams write. So, and let's just call this add members. And essentially this is giving the function that we're going to create the capabilities of teams.read and teams.write, but nothing else. And it's always good practice to give it the least amount of privileges possible. And let's create that and show the secret and copy it over. And what we're going to do now is just create the necessary variables in the functions variables page. So we want to add, first we want the first variable, so we'll just paste in the API key. And from the code over here, we'll just copy over Appwrite function API key and create. And we're going to want another variable called Appwrite function endpoint and Appwrite function endpoint. And this is a little bit tricky, but essentially since this is basically, this endpoint is from the function, we need to tell it how to reach our Appwrite instance. Now we can't use localhost since it's running in Docker, so we have to use the machine's local IP. So the way you can get that is just by typing on Windows ipconfig, on Mac and Linux I think it's ifconfig, and just copy over the wireless LAN adapter, or if you're on Ethernet, so the Ethernet adapter, and just copy this guy over, and http // and then /v1 and create. So now we have the two necessary variables to run this function successfully. So if we now go here, we have this is correct, and let's actually code the functionality of adding the team members to this group. So we have const teams is equal to the teams SDK. We're going to want the const team ID, and the invitees are equal to json.parse rec.payload. Right, if we look over here, it says the payload is the request body that we send to this function from our front end. We say if not team ID or not invitees.length, meaning we either don't have a team ID or there are no invitees. So we're just going to do console.warn missing or incorrect parameters, and we're just going to paste in our team ID and invitees. Cool. And just return res.json, the team ID, invitees, and the payload. And this is just for debugging. In case this fails, payload. All right. Now we get past here. We set the endpoint. And now basically what we want to do is await. This is where we're actually going to invite the team members. Promise.all. And over here we're just going to say invitees.map. And for each person we want to invite, so this is really an email, we're just going to do teams, just get rid of that, say team.create membership. Okay, something I want to do over here before we even get to this point, since I want the autocomplete, just open up your terminal and go into the functions directory and then go into our add members function. And we can see here that we have a package JSON, but we haven't actually installed the modules, which is why we're not getting the autocomplete. So I want to npm I the node Appwrite module. And now once we do that, we'll see that we get the autocomplete for the Teams API. So we're going to say again, await promise.all invitees.map email. And we say for each email, we want to teams.create membership. And over here, we need the team ID. We're going to need the email that we're inviting. We're going to need an empty array for the roles. And then we're just gonna put in a random URL over here. This is essentially where the user would be redirected to if they click on the link in their email. Just to explain a little bit more on that note, is that usually when you invite someone to a team, it will send them an email confirming that the email is indeed legitimate and that they have access to it, and then they click on the link and it joins them to the team. Since we're doing this on the server side, we're going to be able to skip that step. It will still require us to do something a little bit annoying, but we just want to put in a random URL here since we're not actually sending out an email. And just say rest.json success is true. And just like that, we should have the function set up properly. So what we're going to want to do is go back and Appwrite deploy function. We want to press spacebar to select this add members function and deploy it. And if we go to our overview, you'll see that it's building, and in a few seconds it will say success or completed. I don't remember. If I refresh the page, we'll see that we now have, oh, it's still building. It's interesting. There we go, ready, amazing. And if we look at our variables, we have that, perfect, which means that the function is now ready. So if we go back and look at our users for a second, you can see we have two users. We have a team called the Awesome People, which we created in the previous lecture. And we have some unknown person with one role, who's the owner. So let's hook this Appwrite function up to our front end. So if we go back here to the group store, what we see is that we want to invite all the invitees to the group. And the way we're going to do that is await. And we want to execute the function. So let's create a few helper functions over here. So if we go to our API, we want to add a new file called functions.ts. And we're going to create a function called export async function called execute. We will get an ID, which is a string, which is the function ID. We're going to have the data, which is a record of string and any. This is going to be the payload. And then we want async, which is whether or not the function should execute asynchronously or synchronously. And the difference is whether or not we receive the response back immediately or if we have to poll for the result. We usually want async to be true since we don't want to halt any of our functionality while we're waiting for an answer. And then we're just going to say, here we actually want to use the Appwrite SDK to create the function execution. So if we go back to our index, we're going to say we need const functions is equal to new function, where we need to pass through the client. And we want to export the function. Okay, we need to auto import this from Appwrite functions and just copy that over here. And now back in our functions file, we'll just say await functions dot create execution with the ID. This JSON.stringify is very important that we stringify the data and async. Now the only missing piece over here is where do we get the function ID from? So we'll actually do this. We'll create a little bit of organization over here. So if we go to a file called config.ts, we're going to add over here. We want to basically group all our Appwrite configuration stuff. So we're going to also add const functions, and this will be where we keep a map between the name of our functions and the actual function ID. So add members, and the ID is going to be, we don't know what it is yet, so the ID is function ID. And we just want to paste that in here. And then we're going to export this. And wait, execute back in our group store. So we're going to say we want to execute the functions dot add members. And we want to pass in the team ID. Team ID is going to be equal to team dot ID. And the invitees are this dot new group dot invitees. And this way we should be able to add in the invitees. Okay, cool. And let's see what that looks like if we actually run through the group creation flow in the front end now. So let's just inspect to make sure we don't have any errors along the way. And let's create a new group called test1. Next step. Actually, sorry, this is okay, let's go back. We want a new group. This is where we're going to be adding the new context. Let's go back to the beginning a second to make sure we run through this. We want a new group. We want the contact name. So we're going to say person1@gmail.com. We're going to say person2@gmail.com and person3@gmail.com. These are going to be people we're inviting to our group. Next, the group name is going to be people, and create that. No permissions provided for action execute. Let's see. User unauthorized. Okay, this makes sense. Something that we forgot to set up was in our Appwrite functions, we need execute access, right? This is basically who's allowed to execute this function. So we have add any for wildcard access. So we'll just say any and update that. And if we try that again and press the check icon, so that now worked. So if we go to our authentication and teams, so we have people with basically we created two groups accidentally, and the reason for that is because the first time the group did work, but the function execution failed. So when we created it again, so it created a new group called people. Over here you can see we have all the people invited to the group. If we look in the other one, however, you'll see that this one we do not have all the members. So let's actually just delete this team since it's not really relevant. And awesome, we actually now have everyone invited to the team. Now, something that you'll notice if we go back to our users table, we now have person 1, 2, and 3 as users of our project. Now, the only issue over here is that we don't actually know what the password, or there is no password assigned to these email accounts, so we won't be able to log in to actually verify that they have access to the group. So what we're going to have to do when we get up to that stage is manually change their password to something that we know. So we're just going to update the password to something else. It's no big deal, but once we set up the email, so we'll actually be able to test out this flow better, because we'll send an email, we'll be able to click on the link, and then it will, automatically take them to the login page, and they can create their account and set up the password. All right, so this video is already getting on 20 minutes, so I'm going to pause it over here. The next video that we're going to cover is actually, we're going to go to our page over here, and we want to be able to see all the groups that we have access to, as well as the contacts that we have access to, right? We just created contacts person 1, 2, and 3. We want to be able to see those people over here. So it's going to be a little bit tricky, but we're going to tackle that in the next video. All right, have a good one. Bye-bye.